every single day. And most of them are small decisions. You know, what am I going to wear? What are we having for dinner tonight? Should I actually get out of bed? Those kinds of decisions. But we also have to make the big decisions from time to time in life. The decisions that will change direction, that will impact on other people. And those decisions often require a lot of courage. My first opportunity to make a big decision happened when I was 14, when I discovered I was pregnant. I said this to my daughter this morning and she said, "Mum, you're saying it like it just happened." No, I did have something to do with it. But when I discovered I was pregnant and when I told my parents, at that time, when you were living in the country and you were young and a girl and pregnant, your parents pretty much had few decisions, and my parents made the decision that many parents made at that time, which was they sent me to St Joseph's Home for Unmarried Mothers in Melbourne, a Catholic convent. We weren't Catholic. And the idea was that you would go to the home, you would stay there secretly, you'd give birth to your baby, you'd give your baby up to adoption to a good Catholic family, and then you'd go back to your community and go back to school and pretend that nothing had happened and that you'd just been sick for a while. I found it really hard to be there. I was a farm girl, and suddenly I was in Melbourne in this convent surrounded by nuns who I didn't understand. And so I spent a lot of time in my room on my own. And one night, about a month before the baby was due, in the quiet and still of my room, I actually had the opportunity to hear that voice of inner wisdom that I didn't know was there. And that voice said to me, "You're about to make a big mistake. If you do this thing, you will regret it for the rest of your life. You will forever be broken and you will forever have something missing." And so I used that voice to find the courage to speak up to my parents, to the nuns who were unimpressed, and to the social workers to say, "I'm not giving up my baby, I'm keeping her." And I did, and I raised her. And it was a great decision. Cherie's in her 40s now and she's the mother to two of my beautiful grandchildren, so it was a good decision. But it was a decision that was driven by listening to that inner voice. Gotta watch the time. A few years later, I was married with 3 children and I was living in Melbourne, and I was actually really close to actually getting to what had been my dream, which was to become a teacher. I was in my final year of study. And then the Kennett government came to power and sacked thousands and thousands of teachers in Victoria, as well as nurses, and as well as that made cuts across all different sectors in Victoria. Those cuts really impacted on me and my family because we lived in an outer Melbourne suburb where people didn't have much money. And for those who think 6% is a lot, we were paying 18% interest at that time. It was a really tough time. And my community was hurting. And my daughter was then in her first year of high school, and her bus service, which took her to school every day, was cancelled. And suddenly she had to stand on a crowded public transport bus in the aisle, doing 100 kilometres an hour down the Hume Highway going to school. I was angry, really, really angry. That anger powered me to do something I'd never thought I could do. I started organising my local community and I started speaking up. And so we had meetings, we wrote letters. Oh God, we wrote letters. We rang radio stations. I think I had 3AW on speed dial at that time. And eventually I organised a rally on the steps of Parliament House, and 500 of my community turned up. And suddenly I found myself that ashamed 14-year-old pregnant girl standing in front of television cameras and telling the Premier what he should do and why he should do it. That decision, which was really powered by my strong belief that there had to be something better, propelled me into a career working in politics. I worked for the Shadow Minister for Police and Community and Emergency Services, and went on to work for the Leader of the Opposition at the time, writing press releases, working with the media, and my favourite job of all, which was working with local community groups who were activists. A few years later, that decision, that strength of that decision powered me on when I was in a very unhappy and very damaging marriage, and I needed to use that power of knowing there had to be something better to leave my marriage, which I did. It nearly broke me to pieces, but it was the best thing I ever did, because when I did that, I was able to follow my dream and finally found my way into a classroom and was finally able to teach in country Victoria. And then I moved my children and we went to the mid-north coast of New South Wales, and I found myself teaching in an absolutely magnificent Steiner school in a rainforest on the side of a mountain. It was absolutely wonderful, and I raised my children there. I taught there for 10 years, absolutely loved it, great education. And then after 10 years, one day I went into work and I burst into tears, and my friend who was the principal said, "What's wrong?" And before I even knew what I was saying, I said, "I'm leaving." She said, "What do you mean you're leaving?" I said, "Oh, the time's right. It's time. It's time for me to leave." And I just had this very strong sense it was time to make another one of those big decisions. My youngest child, Lachlan, had just finished school, and for the first time since I was 14 years old, I was not raising children. I was able to actually do something. I went home that night and thought, what am I going to do? I don't know where I'm going. I Googled, as you do, and discovered a teaching job in New Ireland province in Papua New Guinea. And so I took that bit of courage and that bit of knowledge that the time was right, and I took that job and I went to Papua New Guinea. It was a great experience. I was there for a few years, and then I decided I wanted to get into educational leadership. So I came back to Australia and went to Byron Bay, where I took up a role as principal of a Steiner school in Byron Bay. Now, it was a big Steiner school and a very sought-after Steiner school. We had 800 on the waiting list waiting to get in. A big school from kindy through to year 12. And I absolutely loved my time there. It was a big job, and there were some great families there, absolutely wonderful teachers and really wonderful staff. But Byron Bay is a very unusual place. I think it's kind of like its own planet. And in amongst our parent group were actors and musicians and authors and people who were famous for Instagram and people who had lots and lots of money, and with that money came entitlement and privilege. The car park was an odd place at pick-up time. There were combi vans and Teslas. I can tell you who gave way to who. But it was sometimes really difficult working with that group. And one day, towards the end of the year, I had an hour-long meeting with a parent who wanted me to really seriously consider the very important issue that the kale in the canteen, whilst it was organic, was not biodynamic. And so that was an hour of my time that I could have been spent working on educational matters, on working with children. And no insult to biodynamics, we've got a great biodynamic farmer up the back. No insult to them, biodynamics is awesome. But homegrown kale that we grew on site, picked daily and served in our canteen was pretty good, I think. Yeah. So at the end of that meeting, I was feeling a bit demoralised, and then I looked in my diary and realised what the next meeting was, and it was another parent. And she wanted to see me because we were doing some building works on our admin building, and I kid you not, she wanted to see me because there were too many right angles in the building, and that made it not Steiner enough. I went home that night and I thought, what is my purpose in life? Like, what am I actually doing? And it was a genuine question. What am I doing? What am I giving? So I Googled again, and I found a job as a principal of a school in remote West New Britain in Papua New Guinea. So I made the decision, I packed up and I went to West New Britain. Unfortunately, I arrived in West New Britain in January 2020. Awesome timing. To say it was a difficult few years is not an understatement. It was very difficult, but it was the most wonderful, awesome, fulfilling work I've ever done. I ran a school, I opened a high school, and the best work ever was I worked with village schools where the children had gone and the teachers had gone because of COVID, and I worked to bring those children back into schools. In Papua New Guinea, the literacy rate is below 30%. Those children need to be in schools. It was wonderful work, and I thought I was going to be there for a long, long time. But then my mum rang, and she said, "We're getting old and we're scared. There's only my brother and I. My parents are in their 80s and they've both had cancer. What are we going to do? My brother was a quadriplegic. What are we going to do? Who's going to look after us?" And then the voice of my heart spoke, the most important voice I've ever listened to. And I made the decision to come home to my family. It was an awesome decision. So there's some of the decisions I've made, and incidentally I'm now here and I'm leading an absolutely outstanding Steiner School in Castlemaine, which is just awesome. Love it. So in my life, some things have helped me to find the courage to make decisions. They are listening quietly to my inner voice. They are using the power of my beliefs to drive my decision making. They are having a keen sense for when the time is right to make a new decision. And they're having a sense of purpose, knowing what I'm here for. And finally, knowing when to listen to my heart. And I think that everybody can find the tools that work for you to make those decisions. I'm just going to end by saying, as a footnote, 7 weeks ago, I sat holding my mum and dad's hand by my brother's bedside as my brother passed away. 4 days later, I was in the room to welcome my beautiful grandson, Rowan, into the world. Coming home was the best decision I ever made.